Hey friends, Ash here. Hope that you're doing well. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about 10 different fragrances that shaped what men around the world are wearing. These are the fragrances that had a huge outsized impact after they were released and inspired other fragrances for years or even decades afterwards. So your favorite fragrance? It may not exist if not for these scents. And don't worry, we're not going super old school with every single release. I've actually got a lot of modern fragrances that are currently shaping what is popular and what's being made today. Everything I talk to you about is going to be linked in the description below. Feel free to check them out down there. Let's get started by heading back to 1966. That's the year that this was released. Christian Dior's Eau Sauvage Eau de Toilette. Now, obviously, this one is probably not going to appeal to many younger guys nowadays, but this one changed things up in a big way when it was released. It's a citrusy, aromatic fragrance. It has a good amount of lemon when you first spray this one on. But along with that lemon, you also have bergamot, there's rosemary, basil, jasmine, coriander, oak moss, vetiver, and additional floral notes as well. And this is a fragrance that really helped change how men's fragrances were being worn at the time. It made use of Hidione in a big way and has kind of a fresh, airy aspect to it while still being very classically masculine. And it's still for sale to this day, decades and decades later. And a lot of the fragrances that came out in the 70s and the 80s had bits and pieces of this fragrance in them. That very classy, citrusy, aromatic, almost barbershop-y vibe that Eau Sauvage does so well inspired so many men's fragrances afterwards. And indirectly, you can almost trace like those initial really fresh men's scents, like this one, all the way to the fresh scents that came decades later that don't really smell like this one, but might not exist if this one didn't. Let's go into the late 80s now with Davidoff's Cool Water, the Eau de Toilette, the original Cool Water, which of course smells similar to Green Irish Tweed from the House of Creed. It was done by the same perfumer, and so you can easily see the inspiration from one to the other. But this is a fragrance that sold in way, way higher numbers to way more people than Green Irish Tweed. So even though Green Irish Tweed came first, and I love Green Irish Tweed, if we're talking about the overall impact to everyone that's buying fragrances, this had a bigger impact. So this one really helped popularize that aquatic, fresh, masculine type of scent profile, which led to more fragrances coming out in the 90s that kind of pushed that evolution along. This does have marine notes, of course. The name is Cool Water after all, but it also has a very strong green aspect to it and has a bunch of ambroxan, which that led to a number of things down the road too. So there's gonna be some fragrances that we talk about later on in this list that probably wouldn't be here if not for Cool Water, which is yet another fragrance that even decades later is still for sale, still popular, and honestly, that one's super cheap. So that's not a bad thing to add to your collection as long as you don't mind having something with an 80s flair to it. Mid-90s now, Jean Paul Gaultier Le Male, the original Eau de Toilette. And so with Le Male, you have a fragrance that pushed things in a different direction once again. It went away from those more masculine-leaning fragrances from the 80s and also the early 90s as well. It moved away from that barbershop kind of feel that a lot of different scents had, aromatic fougères, leathery scents, overly woody fragrances. Those were not in style so much after this dropped, along with some of the other ones we'll talk about. This one is much sweeter, especially compared to a lot of the stuff that was coming out at the time. Had a lot of vanilla in here, lavender and mint. Has a little bit of a powdery aspect to the fragrance and became a huge hit. And obviously, Le Male still going strong. It has spawned a crazy number of flankers, whether we're talking about the Le Male flankers or now the Le Beau flankers. And so by Le Male taking fragrance notes and a fragrance style that at the time would have been considered more feminine and turning it into an extremely popular masculine fragrance, it helped set in motion what was going to come after it even decades later. And it's still really popular. Staying in the mid-90s era, CK One by Calvin Klein. Guys, if you were not alive when CK One dropped, look, let me just tell you, it was everywhere. Everywhere. You could not escape it. Like if you think Dior Sauvage is everywhere now, CK1 was just as bad, if not worse. I don't know if that's actually a bad thing being extremely popular, but you get the idea. It was everywhere. And even though this was technically a unisex release and lots of ladies wore this one, I think 50% of everybody I knew, like guys, owned this. Didn't hurt that it wasn't very expensive. And also when it dropped, it was revolutionary almost. I know you smell CK1 now and you're like, okay, like a little fresh, soapy kind of thing, clean. But this light, fresh, almost sheer clean fragrance, it just worked. It was a little bit minimalistic in how it came across, down to the packaging, the fragrance itself, everything. But this is another fragrance that if it did not exist, you wouldn't have a lot of those fresh, easygoing, easy breezy kind of scents that came out years later. CK1 is monumentally important, even if nowadays it's viewed as like a little bargain bin, who cares fragrance. And kind of keeping in the similar time frame, gotta go with Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette. This is technically my newer bottle, my 2024 iteration, but still. This, when it was released, became like the ultimate everyday fresh men's fragrance. Just an unchained compliment puller. Like, this was the scent. I had people telling me I had to get this years later, like 2004, 2005. This was still just like the king of men's fragrances. And this right here wouldn't exist if not for this, like all of it led to this. It has floral notes that are heavily used that not that long in the past when this was released would have been considered too feminine. And then it has very fresh, clean citrus notes that also at the time, a little bit before rather, would have been maybe frowned on a little bit as far as a major tentpole release from one of the biggest fragrance houses out there. And yet its success speaks for itself. Decades later, there are still Acqua di Gio fragrances coming out. It is still one of the best-selling men's fragrances in the world, and the continued and sustained success of this fragrance and the ones that led to it have led to countless other fresh fragrances that came out over the years. Let's skip forward a little bit. Let's go to Paco Rabanne's 1 Million. 1 Million is a fragrance that pushed this very sweet, warm, spicy scent profile further than really any other major designer release had done up to that point. This mix of like cinnamon, leather, and amber with a little bit of a floral undertone around the edges of the scent. It was something extremely new and unique when it came out. And I don't have to tell you about 1 Million and how successful it is. It's just like some of these over here, right? You still have 1 Million flankers. You have lots of different scents that have come out in the years since this one that are clearly inspired by it. Even if they don't smell exactly the same as 1 Million, you can tell that what this did, what this put in stone as this can be successful, this style of fragrance led to all kinds of things down the road. And I know a lot of people are not massive fans necessarily of 1 Million because it is sweet, it's loud, it's a little flamboyant, it's kind of in your face, it's got a tacky bottle. But that kind of candied, sweet, warm scent profile has proven to be very, very popular, and this laid the groundwork for a lot of things that came after. Next up, I want to talk about Sauvage. Dior Sauvage Eau de Toilette. It doesn't feel like it, but this fragrance is now almost a decade old. And I've spoken a lot about Bleu de Chanel, that being one of the first big fragrances that kicked off the blue wave that came afterwards, all the blue fragrances that all these brands released. And it definitely was really influential. But Bleu de Chanel came out in 2010. This came out 5 years later. So of course, like I said, you could go, well, Bleu de Chanel came first, so that's the one that really changed everything. And you could make that argument for sure. But the whole blue fragrance wave didn't kick off in a huge way until that one. It redefined what blue fragrances even are, because there's Bleu de Chanel and a couple other smaller things. But once Sauvage hit and all the other brands took really strong notice of Sauvage and also Bleu de Chanel, that's when you saw blue fragrances explode. And then every single fragrance house out there came out with their version. So the entire last decade has been shaped by Dior Sauvage. Fresh blue Broxton fragrances, amber wood fragrances, you know, with a little citrus off the top, maybe a little bit of apple, fresh spices, maybe throw in some lavender, some geranium. Yeah, all of that kicked off in a big way by this, which is the most popular men's fragrance in the world. Let's do something a little bit more modern, ever so slightly. Stronger With You from Emporio Armani. And this is almost like an evolution from where this was. They don't smell the same, but you could say this led to that, led to that, led to this. So this is very rich, warm, sweet fragrance. It has kind of a nutty aspect to it, this chestnut vibe. Depending on the fragrance in the line, you know, you could have toffee, glazed chestnut, whatever, but still a very similar semi-gourmand, warm sweetness is what you're gonna find across the whole line. And the success of Stronger With You, and more specifically Stronger With You Intensely that came after it, has led to its own subsect of fragrances, or fragrances in a similar style. They have this kind of addictive, almost dessert-like sweetness to them that just works so well in the air. They have like a magnetic, cozy sexiness to them. The more commonly pointed out fragrances that are a little bit in that style of Stronger With You, Jean Paul Gaultier's Scandal line, the Most Wanted line. And then there are many others as well that have seen what this does, and they've taken that idea and tweaked it and changed it a little bit and continued on that evolution of what this started. And frankly, some other fragrances before this one, but this is like one of the big ones. The big ones. And now an even newer fragrance, which is this, YSL's Myself. It's a fragrance that has a stripped down simplicity to it, but at the same time is very modern, a little bit elegant, and extremely versatile. It's a scent that makes use of orange blossom, so clean white florals, a little bit sweet as well, and a fresh woodsy undertone as it dries down. It's a huge compliment puller, extremely versatile, a massive success. And kind of like what happened with Dior Sauvage, that's happening with Myself also. It's maybe not as blatantly obvious, because it does become really obvious when it's like, here's a blue fragrance in a blue bottle. Here's a blue fragrance in a blue bottle. There's another one. And look at that blue bottle. That becomes really obvious, right? With what happened after Sauvage. With Myself, it's a little bit more subdued, but you can still see multiple brands already 1 year after the release of Myself coming out with fragrances that smell a little bit similar. And so it's almost like going back and doing something, you know, like these over here, but in a more contemporary way, taking those floral aspects, clean citrus, just a very easy to wear fragrance that honestly you could think of as a unisex scent in terms of Myself, and having it pop off in a huge way. It's like history repeating. Instead of having an overtly masculine scent profile, a lot of modern fragrances are changing things up again, like this one and this one, either going extremely sweet, which harkens back to things like this. Again, this does not smell at all like this, but the idea behind it is not super far removed. Or this with these. All right, last up, Oud Wood from Tom Ford. Yeah, we went back in time again. And even though Oud Wood is definitely more of like a niche fragrance compared to all of these, if we're talking about pricing, it still had a huge impact, both in the niche realm and the designer realm. And why is that? Well, of course, the oud. Yes, of course, there were other designer fragrances before Oud Wood that made heavy use of oud, like M7 back here, but M7 did not have the kind of impact that Oud Wood did. After Oud Wood came out, we saw a flood of oud fragrances, and we still continue to see a flood of oud fragrances. Not quite as many in the designer realm, but still a whole mess load of Western style oud fragrances came out after this, and its impact is still felt today. Taking that oud note and making it more of this warm, spicy, kind of mysterious, dark, woodsy scent profile, kind of what happened with Oud Wood. And after that, as I alluded to just now, you saw every single fragrance house come out with oud scents. I mean, really, you can pretty much go through any of these and you can find oud versions of something they put out, like Fahrenheit Absolute with Christian Dior, Stronger with You Oud. It became something where for a span of time, everybody was bringing out Oud flankers, Oud special editions, Oud-centric fragrances, whatever. And the success of this, it is still one of the best-selling Tom Ford fragrances on the market today. Really introduced Oud in a big way to markets outside of the Middle East, at least in a very popular sense. So there we go, guys. There are some fragrances that shaped what people around the world are wearing, what they continue to wear, what they'll wear in the future. And as time goes on, there will be releases that come out. We may not even know it at the time, that inspire and change what people think is good in a fragrance for decades to come. Like when Myself was announced, I don't think anybody was like, oh, this is going to be a huge release that everybody immediately starts trying to copy. But here we are. I wanna thank you guys for hanging out with me. There are so many fragrances that I didn't put in here that deserve to be here. It's just, to make a really extensive, exhaustive list would be a massive, massive undertaking. And I was trying to do just kind of like a high overview kind of thing. Thank you guys so much. Stay safe out there. See you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.